Hi there and welcome. There's nothing like a good example, is there? Like the one behind me now, which shows you how to work out the value of an angle within a triangle if you know the value of the others. And we use examples a lot, don't we? We use them in life. Parents, teachers, people in authority can tell us what to do and how to behave, but mostly what happens is that we imitate other people. We copy one another. We learn by example. Now, the idea of imitating God was quite well known and widely used in ancient Greek society, and it's one that people used. And Paul picks up on it in Ephesians chapter 5, and he uses it to continue his theme of the church as the body of Christ, as that body that continues the acts and maintains the values of Christ. And so we're going to read what he says in chapter 5 and verse 1. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. So follow God's example. Fundamentally, Paul says, live a life of love. Literally, walk in love. Back in chapter 4, he encouraged his readers not to walk as the Gentiles do. And he gave certain examples of conversation and talk and behavior. And now he comes and he says, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us is how we should love. And he contrasts that with 3 things. Firstly, sexual immorality. And the Greek word here is porneia, from which we get pornography. Not romantic love. Paul is saying that the love of Christ, the love we are to live in, is not that kind of romantic love based on attraction, that's based on having my emotional and spiritual needs met. Certainly not casual or recreational sex, careless indulgence of our own sexual appetites, but rather it's the love that seeks the benefit of the other. The love that seeks the benefit of the other, even at a price to myself, to me. It's about how we treat one another in relationship, if you like, not looking to our own needs, but looking to the needs of one another. And by the way, even in a legitimate relationship, it's possible to behave immorally. Just look at, the number of stories of abuse of one kind and another that come out in marriages and other relationships. At the same time, we find nothing in these verses that excuses treating people immorally because we regard their behavior as immoral. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Paul points the finger at you and at me, and we need to look to our own selves. Paul says, look to yourself and not just pointing the finger at others. Having touched on this question of sexual immorality, and I'm not going into the detail of what that might cover, there really isn't time in this video, but as I say, this was he was talking about in the Greek, it's about disordered and inappropriate sexual behaviors. But he then talks about and pairs it, if that's not an unfortunate choice of word, with greed. Actually, self-indulgence, overindulgence, self-centeredness, is anything of that kind is a form of greed. It's actually grasping for myself more than is good for me, more than is appropriate, more than I'm entitled to, more than is good for those around me, is a form of greed. And greed, in a way, and material greed as well, any kind of greed, is a form of theft, actually, because everything that I acquire denies something to somebody else. Now, not necessarily in detail, there are certain things of which manufacturers can produce as many as people want, but in the production, they use up natural resources, human resources, financial resources, all of which are finite. And so, it's like everything else in life, in the world. If you have this, you can't have that. You can't have everything. And unfortunately, the society that we live in instills a kind of a sense of entitlement in all of us. Entitlement in terms of financial and material wealth and possessions and the things we can have. I think back to the little black and white 12-inch TV set that my wife and I had when we first got married. I wonder how many people today would be satisfied with something like that. You have the biggest, smartest, ultra TV set. You're entitled to it. Everybody's got one. And it's the same in sexual relationship. We hear a bit recently, don't we, about people who term themselves as incels. Those are involuntarily celibate. And unfortunately, now and again, one such person takes out their frustration and their bitterness in violence against others because they feel entitled to a sexual relationship and it's just not happening. And it's hard to face the fact that actually society lied to you, that these things are not entitlements, but society has deceived us. And Paul says we mustn't be carried away and just follow the crowd and follow the society around us, but look to his example and to his values. And then he moves on to something else that he says should not exist amongst us: obscenity, foolish talk, of course, joking. Now, this is an area a bit like the talk and conversation in chapter 4 that we looked at in a previous video, where it can be kind of hard to draw the line. And the translation is a little bit difficult, potentially. The word obscenity, the root of it is actually ugliness. Ugly or unnatural, disorderly sexual behavior. An example that one of the commentators used: in Greek and Roman banquets, conversations and even songs about bizarre or inappropriate sexual behavior were commonplace as part of the entertainment. Paul says you should have no part of stuff like that. Greek morologia, chatter, and eutrapelia, wit, not just every form of, but targeting drunken talk, unrestrained and indisciplined talk, unkindness, cruelty, inappropriateness, hurtful, damaging, malicious, that kind of stuff. The Greek writer Plutarch says of Cicero that he often took the eutrapelia too far and so annoyed many and got the reputation of being malicious. We've probably all sat with people who've said something unpleasant or unkind and then put their hand up and said, "Oh, I'm only joking." And just that kind of using humour to put across as an excuse to make barbed comments and an excuse for unkindness. Perhaps the closest thing in our culture is the kind of songs which put football supporters taunt the opposition. And just kind of take some of those and start to make those personal. It's really quite unpleasant. In chapter 4, Paul talked about on unwholesome and corrosive talk by contrasting it with talk that's helpful, upbuilding and beneficial. And here, when he talks about greed in all its forms, he contrasts it with thanksgiving. Let there be none of this, but be thanksgiving. Instead of the attitude that grasps what I'm entitled to, that seizes what I can get for my own gratification, to satisfy my own needs, he contrasts that and says, let's give thanks for what we already have. And the Greek philosopher, another one, Socrates, said the secret of happiness is not found in seeking more, but in developing the capacity to enjoy less. So let's let our conversation, Father, help us to converse in ways that are helpful and upbuilding, that are thankful and grateful, that are not using inappropriate humor and inappropriate sexuality, not tearing down, but building up. Amen.